A very good afternoon to you. You are watching our coverage of South Africa's 6th democratic elections, which largely, since the polls opened this morning at 7 a.m., have gone without a hitch, I would say, but there have been a few instances where things haven't quite opened. By 11:30, the update that we have got from the Independent Election Commission says that 17 stations still hadn't opened, and they're trying to see if they can sort it out. But bear in mind, that's out of 22,900 voting stations that are operating across the country. So certainly in terms of the start of the elections, it does seem to be good. The IEC is also reporting that most of the stations have recorded strong turnouts, reminiscent, they say, of the elections that were held in 1994. That, of course, ushered in South Africa's democracy. So we continue to look, one, update you on what is happening on the ground, at the same time give you insights into some of the issues, of course, that are going to shape this election. And I wanted to remind you very quickly before we started about some of the big numbers that we're talking about here for this election. We are talking about 26.7 million South Africans who are eligible to vote. Voter turnout in the past has been extremely strong. We're talking 70%, a figure I don't think you'll find in many parts of the world. At the same time, as I said, you've got 22,900 voting stations spread out across the country. Voting is open from 7 a.m. until 9 p.m. But as long as you're in a queue within a polling station, you will be able to vote. We're talking about 48 plus political parties with various agendas about where this country should be going, and we'll be trying to delve into some of those things. And very importantly, I should stress, up to now, no violence that is tied to the elections. Even when we talk about the campaigning ahead of the elections, I don't remember many people talking about that. And you might ask, how is the world viewing all of this? Well, we view it through the prism of the rand, of course, and when you look at the rand, it has gone nowhere. Not 2% was the last figure that I noticed. So let's get into the issues. Now, when you look at analysis of South Africa's economic performance over the past decade or so, it does make really for dismal reading. We're talking about growth averaging 1%, and that's around one of the slowest in the world, sitting around levels that you'd expect from a country that is in a war zone. Now, the economy hasn't grown by more than 2% since 2013. So we got to ask the question, what is wrong with us? Well, to find out, in the studio, I've got some of the key voices that should be driving that growth. Let me introduce them to you. Busisiwe Mavuso, she is Chief Operating Officer at Business Leadership South Africa. Ma'am, thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting us.
Audrey Mothupi is CEO of Systemic Logic Group. She joins us to offer the voice of the disruptors. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Sandile Zungu, you will know, is President, Black Business Council, is the voice of the Black business community, and for a long time, a sector that has felt left out of the economy. 25 years on, should we be asking that question, Sandile?
The question remains relevant. But for now, thank you for having me here.
Someone has failed, I'll dare say, because a quarter of a century later, we should be past this and we should be talking about other issues. But let's begin. Coovadia from the Banking Council, I'm hoping, will be able to join us a little later. Let me start in terms of looking for answers. If I can begin with you, Busisiwe. From a business perspective, I know the easy answer is, if I put a question to you and say, why hasn't this economy growing stronger than 2% since 2013? You'll say to me a variety of factors, but one of the factors is that the government did not engage with us in the private sector, and therefore we couldn't do as much as we wanted. But is it only government's fault that we are where we are?
It's not only government's fault, but I think let's take a step back, Godfrey, and let's look at where we were at some point in this country before the past 10 years happened. Remember, at some point, we had 47 consecutive quarters of positive economic growth, where our economic growth was touching about 7%. Now, if you extrapolate and say, where would we have been if we had continued on that momentum, then I can tell you now, we would have banked a trillion rands into our fiscus. The unemployment levels would be sitting at 16%, not at the 37% that it's sitting at, and I think our growth would still be between 5 and 6%. So you therefore have to say, if we had the formula at some point in our country, what went wrong in the past 10 years? But you also have to say, what is the function of growth? Because if you look at the function of GDP, it's investment, business investment, it's consumer investment, and it's of course, you know, the government spending, as it were. So you therefore have to say from a GDP perspective, you know, have those elements, you know, grown at the level that they were supposed to grow.
Yeah.
And I think you and I would agree that the level of business investment has not been what it has been. And we have to say, what are the factors for that?
Yeah.
So a big factor that we've been saying as businesses, that policy uncertainty and policy stability have been the biggest issues. At the moment, we're sitting with this contentious issue of the mooted, you know, property rights, you know, around prescribed assets, you know, the issues around the independence of the Reserve Bank and what Section 25 is going to mean when it's amended. Now, you can't have an environment like that and still think that local investors and foreign direct investment and foreign direct investors are going to continue putting money into the country.
I'm going to be controversial and say it sounds to me like you're saying a certain president should have continued before a certain president came in and ran the country. Is the politics stupid, right?
That's
as
Clinton's
Clinton's speechwriter would have said. But when you look also at the factors that powered those 47 consecutive sectors or quarters of growth, you got to say the world moved on, because it wasn't just South Africa that was growing. Everybody was also growing. Absolutely. And then everybody went, of course, through that 2008 financial crisis. But the difference was you had other countries being able to recreate the jobs that they lost during the financial crisis. South Africa was not able to do so, and in fact continued on this long slump. So part of the blame, if I may be so controversial as to suggest, has to go through surely to the business sector, because government, while we are saying it did not create a conducive environment, surely the private sector itself also wasn't innovative enough. But
Godfrey, you therefore have to say, was the environment conducive for businesses to continue to invest? You have to, you see, the problem with South Africa is that we cannot continue to talk left and walk right. If we're saying we're positioning ourselves as an investment destination, unfortunately, you know, we have to assume a certain posture. So once that posture is no longer there, then, you know, foreign direct investors and local investors are actually going to find somewhere else to put in their money. So you therefore have to say, was the environment conducive enough, and did we do everything that we could have done to ensure that investment stays in the country? Because then otherwise there are other options.
So I'm trying to keep it simple, so I'll take the answer as government is the one that got this one wrong. Sandile, from your perspective, big participants you guys were in 1994, and here we are 25 years later, as I was saying, and we're still talking about some of the issues that we're talking about in 1994. Who is to blame here?
Well, if you look at the history of South Africa, dating back to the era of colonialism, to apartheid, to post-1994, there is an entrenched culture of celebrating big, what I will call jumboism. Big business is what needs to be supported. And the other side of the coin is that the interests of small business tend to be overlooked in a very serious way. And I will argue to the detriment of the South Africa's economy's interests, and therefore South Africa's people's long-term interest. What has been lacking over the last, say, 25 years of our democracy has been a concerted and a non-begrudging commitment to supporting the cause of small business. Because if that was to be done, trust me, the economy would be propelled to a much better trajectory for growth. And number two, the challenges that we have around unemployment will be resolved a lot better, because the elasticity for creating employment in the small to medium sector is much higher than in big business. When a big business wants to invest the next million to either renew capital or to expand its capacity, they'll want to do it with less labor. And they are aiming to achieve greater efficiencies. And so the challenges that we have in this country of unemployment, of inequality, lie in terms of solutions in the SMME sector. And that's what we have been failing to do as South Africans, because we are celebrating jumboism.
Absolutely. I think we should freeze this moment, because while you were speaking, I saw her nodding. A Black Business Council and BLSA talking together and finding a unanimity. Let me come quickly to you, Audrey. From your perspective, your initial thoughts in terms of who got it wrong and why we have not been going anywhere.
I think, Godfrey, today is an amazing day and we're going out and we're electing. So I represent entrepreneurs and more important, I employ actually millennials. So for me, the answer is not even looking at who got it wrong and who got it right. Starting tomorrow, the responsibility starts with every single person. So there's a responsibility around that, or I call it, if you look 25 years back, that public-private partnership, which we all took to and enhanced and embraced. So from a blame point of view, I'd say actually, when I wake up every day, I wake up to create jobs. The man on the street, the man in the blue overalls, the teacher, the nurse out there, or even the lady selling magwinyas on the street, she wakes up every day because she has to make ends meet. And that's her job, and she's proud about it. If you look at the youngsters today, they're not looking to big business to go and be employed. They're saying, actually, give me access. Make sure, give me affordable data so that I can find ways of building a portfolio approach to how I self-employ myself. And by that I mean I can use my phone as my company to figure out ways of innovating, selling my product, cross-selling. So when we talk about social media and the youngsters, it's not just a place where they go and complain. It's also a place where potentially the future economy lies.
Absolutely. I like your can-do attitude because it says, yeah, whatever happened in the past happened in the past, but it's not going to define our future, and we refuse to be bound by that past. All right, we're going to pick up this discussion. But for now, let's look at this one. Now, at the birth of South Africa's democracy, a dream, a vision with the birth of Whiphold unfolded. CNBC Africa selection team went to visit the women who dominated business to see how things changed for South African business women since 1994.
"25 years ago, at the dawn of South Africa's democracy, many things seemed possible. Some things seemed highly impossible. The idea of black women calling the shots in high finance and investments seemed basically improbable. And yet it happened, thanks to the tenacity of these three women."
On the 4th of April 1994, I was called by Noma Temba,
That's me.
otherwise Wendy, that is known, said, "Louisa, there's a meeting by the former governor Tito Mboweni. He was at that time the head of ANC economic desk. There was going to be a workshop, and when we arrived there, clearly there was every man and there was no women. I think it was myself and Wendy and Khomoto and I can't remember who. And immediately once we had, obviously, the opportunities that were going to unfold as a result of the new dispensation that was coming, to be ushered in, we then decided with Wendy that, but why don't we start our own company as women? A company that will be owned and run by us as women, for the benefit of us as women, for the benefit of wealth creation for us as women. And immediately we then decided that clearly it cannot be just the two of us. For that vision to garner strength and traction, we needed to make sure that we invite other women.
And bring them they did. 18,000 women shareholders invested in the business in 1994, a true testament to their vision and to their everlasting resilience and determination.
I think it's the point that Gloria is making, that we had the numbers behind us. So it wasn't just the four founders who were driving the agenda. We had people in thousands standing behind us and demonstrating their belief in the vision, not just in word, but with their money. They invested 100 million rands of their own money behind the vision. And that says something. And I think that's what sets apart Whiphold from any other empowerment story that exists in South Africa. It's the only one I'm aware of that ordinary women put in their 600 rands to support a vision that was not only revolutionary, but was at the dawn of South Africa's democracy.
In fact, just to add to that, because you are reminding me now of the current discussion around the trusts and the BEE Commission, all of that. The point here with Wiphold is that Wiphold first decided we will be broad-based. Two, there's no prescription, there's no law. This is now 1993 or 94. Number three, to do that, it was a public process now. We did an IPO, initial public offer to women, with prospectors, with lawyers behind it, Edward Nathan, with accounting firms behind it, Deloitte, with Standard Bank behind it. So it was a normal IPO, a public offer to women of this country. Now you've got 18,000 of them. You have to house them in something. So we house them in WIP Trust. And so 25 years later, to be asked, where are these people, where are these beneficiaries? This trust we can't recognize. They've paid for their shares. They've responded to a public offer process with proper, all of these things, share register, you name it. So, of course, 25 years later. And making sure there were women with affidavits in the prospectus. We had an affidavit in the prospectus that when you buy these shares, please confirm we're a woman, today at least. And go to the police station, get a commission of oath to confirm that you are a woman. So there's nothing mysterious about this, at least, because it was an IPO, a normal IPO. And we did this on our own. We did this without law, without legislation. And today, if we were to do it, it would be exactly like that.
Their investment portfolio continues to expand. Wiphold has invested in agriculture, cement and mining, sectors that they believe are going to take them into the future.
The next 25 years, I think those young girls and ladies who are in their offices now, they should be the one sitting here and taking you through what they have in mind. We have created a platform for them that from here on, they should really be the ones to plug in or put extra bricks to make sure that this house does not collapse. And they are there, and we are happy that we will leave Wiphold in very good hands with them. Because as Gloria says, average years, it's about 15 years for them being at Wiphold.
Well, they know the organization well. They own the vision. The foundation has been laid, and it's a solid foundation. So I think we need to leave it to them to define what the future should look like. We've done what we can, and we'll hand over to them a healthy, mature adult.
The vision is clear, the investment strategy sound, and Wiphold is ready to go into the next 25 years. Kopano Gumbi, Houghton.
Thank you, Kopano. As someone in the studio was mentioning, yeah, she got some goats there. If you're wondering if we're talking about the variety that we kill for meat, no. We're talking about the greatest of all times. Some very powerful women there. So we pick up our discussion on what went wrong with South Africa with the CEOs that I have in the studio with me. And we have now been joined, like I said earlier, by Coovadia, and he is from the Banking Association of South Africa. Cass, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
As you were making your way here, as you were getting your fingers dirty with the ink, we were discussing just how South Africa found itself where it is today. And I wanted to go past the blame game to an extent and say, when you guys do your look-ins, your introspections, do you see yourselves in the mirror as perhaps being part of the problem that perhaps prevented this country from reaching its true potential of economic growth?
Well, I think yes and no. I think there's a whole lot of stuff that happened in the last decade or so that I think I can look at myself in the mirror and fairly comfortably say I was not part of. But having said that, I think that we haven't, even as business, had the hard discussions on just how we need to structure this economy.
Right.
To actually not just get the growth, necessary growth going, but ensure that it's sustainable and it's inclusive.
Right.
So the last 10 years, I think we could even have done that during the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that whenever I introspect, I think we could have done more on.
Yeah.
And I think we still need to do now.
Yeah. So I want us now to take the conversation forward and talk about what needs to be done. So I remember during the previous decade, and you know, we use this euphemism of the previous decade to talk about the tenure of former President Jacob Zuma. And I remember trying to write a story about some of the conversations that were taking place about what the private sector ought to be doing to try to get the economy growing, even though it appears that there were issues with the government. And one of those conversations centered around conversations that needed to take place between the government and the private sector. So let's begin with the private sector. When you guys analyze where South Africa is at the day, you surely must identify and see things that you think, let's use the old cliche, low-hanging fruit that ought to be done. Come, from Monday let it be, because we will know the result by the weekend. From Monday that the government and you guys can start attacking to get this economy growing. Maybe just give me 3.
So I think by our own admission as big business, we have failed on transformation. The fact that 25 years into democracy, when you look at the top echelons of private sector in terms of the demographic representation, you know, only 14.3% as at the last Commission of Employment Equity report that was released by the Department of Labor, only 14.3% is Black Africans. It shouldn't be. You know, not in a country where 80% of the population is Black Africans, not when the stats are saying in universities there is more Black people being accepted, there is more fast graduating than there is more fast being accepted, or rather being absorbed by the private sector. It therefore goes without saying that there is this artificial class ceiling that exists for Black professionals, you know, within the private sector. So private sector can definitely do more in as far as inclusive socio-economic growth and transformation is concerned. So that's number one. I think the second one as well, business has continued to focus on the business side of business. For whatever reason, we have stayed out of the political economy fray, forgetting that, you know, the economic growth of any economy is constrained by its political economy. Because remember, Godfrey, by staying out of the political economy debate, you are therefore saying, I'm happy to surrender my fate to whoever is involved. But it cannot be. If you agree that as business we're the biggest social partner, if you agree that if this economy were to collapse, we stand to lose more, then it goes without saying that we have to be active in this space. So I think the business stance of just focusing on the business side of business has not, you know, been helpful, as it were. And then I think whether, irrespective of where we'd like to, how much we'd like to play the play game on this one, the private sector has found itself wanting, you know, in as far as corruption is concerned. Remember, when it comes to corruption, there is the corruptor and the corruptee, you know, and the past 10 years and the losses that we've made, the 1.5 trillion, you know, that this economy has lost, you know, in the past 10 years, the private sector has had a role to play in that. And we know now, looking at the State Capture Commission, you know, the Busasa, the Steinhoff, the KPMG, you know, so I think putting the mirror in front of ourselves as private sector, we actually admit that we ought to be doing more in as far as these 3 things are concerned: socio-economic growth, transformation, and actually ensuring that we conduct ourselves in an ethical and moral way, you know, so that we are not found wanting, so that we are seen to be contributing, you know, to the progression of the country and not holding it back.
Absolutely. All right. I'll take those 3 points and stop it there. Audrey, I'm going to make you listen to all of this. Sandile.
There are 2 things that I'm particularly fascinated about. On the matter of transformation, it's not so much about the elevation of historically disadvantaged people into the top echelons. That is a major issue, granted. But how do you ensure that you leverage on the wealth that is already in Black hands? And to make sure that it grows faster and can contribute to the country's growth. The biggest distribution that has happened in this country that is less spoken about is how the government has put 3 million houses in black hands for free, 3 million plus. These houses are in townships. Yet, what we have failed to do is to bring industry into those places, closer to where these houses are built, so that the equity value that is in black hands could grow, so that you create a market, so that they can actually use that to get on in life. I think that's an opportunity that is a low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, and that cannot be done by ignoring the interests of small business. Number two, the corrosive role of monopolies in this country. I spoke about the dogma of Jimboism, where we celebrate what is big. What has happened is that we have actually been very lenient and been very patient and tolerant of monopolies, oligopolies in this country, who have been very corrosive. And they've squashed the space and squashed the small, medium players who want to enter and actually render them useless. You will see the multinationals who come into this country, they will see small service providers in their supply chain as some kind of source of credit, as some de facto bankers who they can pay in 180 days, in 90 days. And by the time they're paid, they're gone, they're dead. So we need to protect those because, like I said, employment creation will come from those. Economic growth will come from those. It's a low-hanging fruit. The amendment to the competition competition law, which we influence as Black Business Council, is a step in the right direction. Because you want to make sure at the same time that you want to protect champions. Yes. You want to build them. But foster this greater symbiotic relationship between big business and small business in this country.
I'm going to come back and interrogate each of your ideas, but let me get Kassim.
Let me just agree with Sandile's first point. I think there is a lot of debt capital in the country that we can actually activate. So things like, you know, De Soto used to talk about many years ago about enabling people, even in informal settlements and so on, to actually own their pieces of land, to own their houses, to enable that capital to actually become alive, and they can then trade that capital to actually improve their own lives. And I think that's the one message we need to send out now that we, through all this new administration and so on. I think we need to create the environment for wherever possible to enable people to actually pull themselves up with the capital they currently have. And make that capital living. I think the other thing is that I agree with the points made on transformation. I agree with the points made on the structure of the economy and monopolies and so on. Yes. But I think one of the things we need to avoid doing is to say that we want to deal with these things outside of the imperative of actually getting growth going and investment into the country. Right. Okay, so I think that the number one priority has got to be to test everything we do against whether it actually encourages and facilitates and brings in investment and releases local investment so that we can get growth going, because all of this doesn't happen without that. So to me, that's the number one priority. Then I think we need to begin to ensure that transformation isn't something that's sitting on the side. We need to begin to promote the narrative that in our country, given our conditions, transformation and inclusion are absolutely necessary conditions for economic growth and sustained economic growth. Right. We can't get 5, 6, 7% growth rates, let alone sustain it, if we don't include the majority of the people in this country into the formal economy. Absolutely. So I think those sorts of discussions we need to have. The final point is that I think we need to bite the bullet as various sectors of society and now say that all of these things, they don't just happen. They're going to need trade-offs and compromises from across the board. Okay? And we need to sit down and have that hard discussion.
Who now is that?
That's business, government, and labor, actually. We need to sit down and have that hard discussion. It's not business as usual for any of us.
Yeah.
There's going to be trade-offs and compromises across the board, and we need to start talking about that for the long-term economic future of this country.
Absolutely. I made you listen to all of that because you come in as a disruptor to an extent, unshackled by traditional practices and traditional positions and ideologies.
Yes. And I think it's interesting listening, and I'm glad you asked that I disrupt, because where we are now, for the person listening, we've got the mention, I think you mentioned earlier, about 14 million youth, some of whom haven't come out to vote. The word that comes to mind and stands out is execution. Guys, we've talked too much. And with that public-private partnership that we've raised over and over again, as an entrepreneur, and it's good to disrupt, speaking as an entrepreneur, come Monday, I still have to wake up making sure that the execution that actually come, not even Monday, come the 20th, I've collected money to pay the salaries. So it's about saying, how do we actually take, and I think what has happened before, and I'm sitting with my esteemed colleagues who've done a lot of work before, 25 years in, the questions we're going to be asked, you started the show looking at what are the questions we need to be asking. The questions we're going to be asked is not whether we've transformed or not. The questions we're going to be asked is whether actually we've done enough to ensure that every single person who's got a dream out there to go and actually build something new, work in a new corporate, is enabled and empowered to. How do we do that? In the big corporate, creating jobs is not about necessarily what we already have. It's saying those that are entering, how are we training? How are we empowering that person? We talk about transformation, I talk about inclusivity. It's financial inclusion, it's economic inclusion, it's society inclusion, it's the basics of whoever we train and who mentorships. When you talked about the great women that we just saw from Withhold, those women are amazing. Those women are mentors to many young women looking at new businesses. When I look at someone like Wendy, for example, spends a lot of time engaging with young emerging business practitioners. So when I talk about execution and disruption, inclusivity is more around, we have to on Monday ask, what am I doing? And I is every single person out there. It's not big business, it's not government. It's when you wake up and you believe in this amazing, beautiful democracy that we've got. With all the challenges that we have, what can I do differently? If I'm sitting in a corporate and I'm a qualified CA and I've been doing great, what am I doing to enable the one that's walked in to do their articles? If I'm sitting in government at the moment, what am I doing? It's that vuku zenzela. What am I doing when I walk and the queue is long and I'm trying to register new births? And I'm looking at it like, ish, it's going to be a long day. No, it's not ish, it's going to be a long day. Wow, I've got a great job and we've got new citizens that I need to register.
Every day is an opportunity that should be taken. All right. So I think there are common themes that we have all picked up, and I'm sure you'd have picked up your own as well. So transformation, certainly, I think there's no argument to be had about that. But the only question I would have around transformation is that it's not an overnight thing. I am looking for a solution that Cyril Ramaphosa, okay, if he is president on Monday, he gets out onto his desk and he says, "There's the stroke of a pen. Can I do something?" Maybe I'm being too simplistic. Aren't there any of those things that perhaps the president could do? I can think of one. If you woke up and you said, no expropriation of our land without compensation, what would happen to the rand, do you imagine? How much money do you imagine will come into this country? But we know it's not going to happen, right? Are there any such things that we could focus on, that perhaps the president and the teams that come to him is going to be looking at and thinking potentially this is something that could be transformative overnight? Anyone?
Look, I think earlier on, Sandile spoke about the ownership and wealth patterns of this country. I think from a big business perspective, what we can definitely do, and I agree with Sandile, this is not just about employment equity, this is not about...
This is personal, like she's saying, where we can begin at a personal level and be able to effect and do something different.
But I think to Cass's point, if you look at what is our role as the four social partners, you know, in this country, I think as big business, we can definitely improve from a management control perspective. Because remember, if you agree that each and every or most black people have got 10 mouths that they are feeding, by empowering, the fact that 40% of black people in this country are unemployed is a disaster. The fact that out of the 9 provinces, in the 7 provinces, there's more people that are unemployed than those that are employed, you know, is concerned. It's actually a disaster. So around the YES initiative that big business has initiated of saying we're going to create 1 million jobs of the young people, the focus ought to be on black. You know, the SME fund that we've created of 1.4 billion, where we're saying we're going to be helping small businesses, the focus ought to be on black. Until there is a deliberate and intentional focus on black in this country, then unfortunately the structure of this economy is going to remain as it is. So from a big business perspective, I think there has to be a deliberate intention and effort around empowering black.
Absolutely. I wanted to raise the issue of the monopolies and the best way of tackling them. I think we all recognize the monopolies that, well, we're calling them monopolies, but they're not quite monopolies, are they? And they are also not legislated. I think that's the better word, oligopolies. Yes, absolutely, 100%. So we know about, sorry, Cass, the big four banks and what happened to it. We all know about our big retailers. We all know about our big mining companies. What is the best approach in not killing the champions? Who talked about killing champions? Not killing the champions, but ensuring that the champions play with the young in the same way that we see these kind of things happening in the US. Can I begin with you, Cass, and then we come through?
Sure. No, and I think it is a balance between killing the champion and actually ensuring that champions conduct themselves in a way that they understand that, in my view, the appropriate and good way of doing business is to create more champions. Okay, so I think that one, where competition law is such that it's actually blocking entry, it's making it difficult for SMEs to actually grow, it's creating a situation where a single player or two players are able to manipulate the market and so on. I think there should be sufficient law to actually take care of that.
Right.
Okay, and that law must be robust, and it must be applied robustly, and must take care of that. But at the same time, the bigger players need to begin to understand that, quite honestly, if they don't conduct, for instance, their procurement practices, their other value chains, in a way that enables small players to actually come into those and begin to grow and begin to become champions in their own rights, quite honestly, in 20 years' time, we're not doing business.
100%.
It's not rocket science.
It's interesting what you raised, because the other day I was thinking to myself, my bank card had been delivered by the bank, by a company that's called something. I don't want to mention the company, it's not fair. But I thought about that company and I thought to myself, I've never heard of this company. And then I looked it up a little bit and I found the company, it was established in 1994. And you talk about procurement practices that stifle competition. When was the last time, say, one of the big four banks actually looked at who's supplying them this kind of thing? So it's the attitudinal change that we are talking about.
Exactly, and that's certainly from a banking association point of view, that's the sort of stuff we're engaging our members on. Absolutely. How do they do their business to actually enable entry?
And spread the net.
Well, I mean, if you look at the concentration that we have in certain key sectors.
And that's the word, it's the concentration of economic power, isn't it?
That's right. In some very key sectors of the economy, it's obviously troubling, because countries with the same kind of traits and features as ours, who are emerging and who want to break into the ranks of the high growth companies or developed economies, they tend to have a multiplicity of players in the banking sector. Much more diverse than what we have in South Africa. It's an obvious area for attention, and I think Cass will have spoken about it. He is at the helm of such. I think the role of multinationals is something that needs to be examined.
Right.
South Africa has invested a lot of money in supporting the automotive industry. And I think the auto industry can be credited for keeping towns like Uitenhage and Port Elizabeth alive. Credit to them. I think our claim to competitiveness in certain areas of manufacturing, credit to auto sector. But what you are seeing is when they move into an area, they bring the supply chain partners from Germany, from Japan, and in the case of Toyota, and to the exclusion of local players who we worry when the MIDP program, which is very attractive to them, comes to an end sometime later. Whether will we have a strong base to can sustain ourselves as an auto player in the future? And I will argue that no, because the evidence suggest to me that they come with their own players, they set up here, like for lack of a better word, like the colonialists of old, who when their term of office comes and they march away, leaving no capability. So it's something that we need to worry about and be concerned about. We have the time available to us because the MIDP program has been extended to actually sort out these things, because otherwise we are fooling ourselves.
Absolutely, 100%. Let me get your input as well before we take a break. Yeah.
I think I'll come back from a disruptive point to say that the champions, a lot of the old traditional champions were small entrepreneurs themselves at once. But actually the future...
in 1897 Anglo-American was an SMME.
Exactly. but if I'm disrupting in the youth and in my world, the champions of the future, look at Alibaba and Apple and Google. So I'm going to challenge differently and say we need to start looking within the big organizations to be more innovative, to find more innovations that are coming through, to try and disrupt ourselves and build businesses, hopefully that we can catch 1 or 2 unicorns. I want to see an Apple and Alibaba from South Africa.
Absolutely. Who creates that environment for that to happen? Is that a legislative thing? Is that a moral suasion thing? Is that a factor of you standing up and saying, I can do this and I will do it and I'm not asking for permission?
And I'm glad you asked that, because interesting enough, a lot of that is happening already. We started off in the public, what I'm hearing here is all around the public-private partnership. If you look at what actually from a government point of view, there are a lot of innovation. The banking sector, for example, has done a lot of that. There are a lot of innovation hubs. There are a lot of startup centers. There are a lot of what we call from angel investors to main investors, etc. So if you and that's why the issue of data I mentioned earlier, data and Wi-Fi, data to access information is important, because when you create things like free Wi-Fi, and we take free Wi-Fi all the way across our country, we're saying that the ability to innovate is coming from somewhere. So Alibaba, for example, it took him 19 years before he got to where he was. And Jack Ma was here end of last year, and he says, we have to empower the entrepreneurs. Right. So in and amongst us, we have that person, but we need to enable that innovation using technology.
100%. Busisiwe, your thoughts?
So I think in as far as oligopolies are concerned, I think my view, Godfrey, is that conditions for people to prosper are not God-given, they are created. And it is the role of the government to ensure that the environment from a regulatory perspective is controlled to ensure that there is more players that are coming into the market. So we have to lessen the barriers to entry, because by doing so, then you bring new entrants. And if you have new entrants, then therefore you have competition. If you've got competition, then you drive the prices down. And if you're driving the prices down, then affordability happens. And if affordability happens, then consumer spending increases. And if consumer spending increases, then the demand increases. And demand increases, then companies can employ more people to actually ensure that we meet the demand. And once that happens, then the aggregate output increases. Aggregate output increases, growth happens. Growth happens, poverty reduces. So it's a cycle, but it all starts by a conducive environment that has been created to facilitate this whole, chain to ensure that it unravels and it happens as it should.
When you go and you see the president and you talk to him about this, what do you say to him in terms of perhaps best examples where he could look around and say, this place was able to create an environment that enables the creation of the unicorns that she's talking about, while at the same time nurturing the champions that we already have? So
for every area and opportunity that we have identified in this country, if it's foreign direct investment, for instance, the way he has
that's one easy fix, isn't it?
Exactly.
To an extent.
But then you see it all boils back to, is the environment conducive for foreign direct investment? Is the environment conducive for people like Audrey, as SMMEs to come in and play and disrupt the way they ought to? Is the environment conducive, for other players to come in and ensure that we don't have oligopolies? There are policies that regulate all of this. And the government has to ensure, because as business, we can't do it. As SMMEs, they can't do it. As labor, they can't do it. So the government, therefore, has to ensure that the environment is such that it fosters, this kind of
environment. So we speak about the creation of the environment as a key ingredient in order to be able to create the kind of conditions that enable companies to come in and invest their capital, right? Okay, so let's recognize where we are now. I mean, when you look back, there was certainly an issue in terms of the government-business relationships, and even within business and business, let me put it this way, black business, established business. Let's recognize that that environment is slowly improving. Right. Now that it is improving, how do we leverage off that and ensure that the conversations that take place are no longer the acrimonious ones that used to take place, but are now more focused on getting this country to grow forward. Do we need to create a new platform, Sandile, where we bring government, where we bring the private sector, where we bring, obviously, our financiers?
Yeah, I don't think we need to create new structures.
No?
No.
What structure do we use, though?
We have NetLeg, for example. As a
Do we still want to continue saying NetLeg?
No,
I think sometimes we need to refresh and rename these things.
NetLeg is the right platform
Is
for
it?
social dialogue among social partners.
Yeah.
You must just make sure it works better.
Yeah.
And number two, those who are entrusted and given a mandate to lead the country must inspire sufficient confidence to not allow that dialogue to break down.
Yeah.
So one of the key responsibilities for the president, when we talk about low-hanging fruits and doing things that actually inspire, is obviously assembling an executive that will inspire that confidence.
Can I get quick comments? Do we need still NetLeg to be driving this? Do we need a new name for NetLeg? Do we need a new structure out of NetLeg?
Look, I think NetLeg is an essential structure provided we fix it up. But I don't think it's the only structure of dialogue.
Do we need multiple structures?
I think what we need to do is we need to move away from these sort of grand structures and grand summits and all of these sorts of stuff, because they don't create the jobs, they don't take care of the problems.
Yeah.
So NetLeg, I think, is a good forum for the social parties to get together, talk about critical pieces of legislation and so on. But I think that different pockets of discussion need to happen around stuff that we can start implementing and start asking what's stopping the implementation. And it's those sorts of hard discussion that we need to have with 20 people in the room and sort those things out and move.
Okay.
So NetLeg, I'm not disagreeing with what needs to fix it up.
But you are looking for more channels. Okay, let me get that so everybody's thoughts quickly.
Yep, we just need to go out there and execute. We just need, we've talked to much.
Do you need
25
structures?
years in.
Because you
No,
were
but
saying
the
to me, you know.
So if I think about my world and the disruptors and technology out there, the structures are in the platforms that we use and the technology. The enabling structures that we have, yes. If I want information, I'll know where to get that information. Structures like NetLeg, I think, were necessary and are required from the beginning where we are. The second wave, we need them to know what not to do from the lessons learned and have the right people to craft the future. But going forward, actually, we need more action, less structures, less meetings.